Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining The Power of Sleep, part of the Live Better Longer series from the American Federation for Aging Research and Prevention magazine. I'm Sarah Smith, the editor-in-chief of Prevention, the health and wellness magazine and site, where we're fascinated not just by what's good for us, but why it's good for us. So naturally, I'm very excited today to be talking to two accomplished scientists so we can learn more about sleep and go a little deeper than, you need it. If you haven't joined us for a Live Better Longer webinar before, we are so glad to have you. And if you have, terrific. So then you already know that what we're doing is having fascinating conversations with leading experts so that we can share not just the latest research around health and aging, but understand how to apply it to our lives. AFAR is a leader in supporting aging research, really making sure this area of research, which affects all of us, gets the attention it deserves. And Prevention has a long history of bringing advice and ideas to people across the country. So today, I am thrilled to be talking to Connie Fung of UCLA and Brandon Westover from Mass General about their work, helping us to understand our brains and the science of the science of sleep and everything we need to keep ourselves living healthy and happy and good and long. So doctors, by way of introduction, could you tell us how you got involved in sleep research? What drew you to it and what are you focused on right now? Connie, would you start us off?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I'm really excited. So my interest in sleep research really evolved from some longstanding interest in healthy aging. Really, ever since I was an undergrad, I've been interested in ways to help individualize, maximize their daytime function long term. Really, to be able to help people do the things they want to do um, in their daily lives, as they're growing older. And so my interest in sleep and aging developed when I was on a project that was looking more broadly at quality of care in older adults. And I was overseeing some systematic reviews, really looking at what's already been published on a variety of conditions, including sleep. And I saw that sleep affects so many aspects of people's lives, and improving sleep can have immediate impact on daytime function. And so I really wanted to shift my focus to developing interventions that can improve sleep in older adults. And my current research focuses on chronic insomnia disorder and sleeping pills. I have an ongoing clinical trial that aims to identify the best method for switching patients who have chronic insomnia disorder and use sleeping pills to switch from sleeping pills to non-medication approaches for chronic insomnia disorder.
So interesting. Thank you. And Brandon, how about you? Tell us what got you into this and what you're working on.
I got interested in kind of brains, and when I was, I think, 5 or 6, we went on some field trip with scouts and saw monkeys getting EEGs, and I had the idea that they were, someone was reading their thoughts, which was not true, but it got me really interested and then I've always been interested in math, and so I was a PhD student, I was interested in using kind of computational approaches and mathematical approaches to understand how the brain works. I wasn't initially interested in sleep, but after I became a neurologist, I am specialized in EEG. I do a lot of monitoring patients who are critically ill, and one of the things that we noticed is that they almost never have normal sleep, and actually that's and often they're confused and disoriented, and started wondering about the connection between sort of lack of sleep in that setting and some of the cognitive problems that they have. And then the other way, I guess I had a very good friend named Matt Bianchi, who was just always telling me about the opportunities in the sleep field to automate a lot of the tedious things that we do, sort of annotating data and as a way to maybe learn more from this kind of very rich data about brain health. And so I've been able to kind of attracted to sleep as a way to as a window into the health of the brain, an opportunity to use machine learning or computational approaches, and just a way to better understand how we can help people, especially who are critically ill, to maybe fare better in terms of how well their brains function while they're in the hospital and after they get out.
Great. These are two really fascinating approaches. I'm looking forward to diving in with you both. Before we do, though, I do have to ask something I'm very, very curious about, which is that does being a sleep researcher mean you've got it all dialed in? Do you sleep beautifully every night?
I've always had trouble with insomnia myself. Actually, I get working on a problem and can't quit thinking about it, even if I really want to. And that's but yeah, I mean, the more I learn about sleep, and the more I think I've internalized some of the lessons that we've learned. I certainly understand better the importance of it, and try to give myself enough opportunity to sleep.
Yeah. What about you, Connie? Do you sleep well?
Well, last night it was kind of hot, so maybe it wasn't the best night. But I do, like Brandon, try to put to use some of the advice regarding expectations of sleep that I give to patients, which is like I say to myself, okay, last night it was a little hot, but every once in a while people may have a night that's not so great, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be like this every night. And I certainly I can take steps to make my sleep better over the next few days, and things will improve. So yeah, I mean, I try to do some of the things that I advise.
That's great. That's very reassuring. And I'm sure we will get to some of those things later so that we can all try to start working on them ourselves if we're not sleeping well. But, I'd love to start with a little bit of background so we're all on the same page, sort of. Brandon, could you walk us through what's happening in the brain when we sleep? I think most people have heard of REM sleep or REM. I don't know. You have to tell me how you say it. But what is that stage? What are the other stages? What's literally going on in there?
Yeah. So you'll have to forgive me for describing this through the lens of the EEG, which is it's kind of the world that I live in. But yeah, when you
reader, is that the monkey mind reader?
Yes, it is the monkey mind reader. It's the electroencephalogram. This is, you put wires on, or kind of electrodes on the outside of a person's head, so you don't have, it's not invasive. You can measure the electricity the brain generates, and see what happens when they're going to sleep. At least from an outside point of view. But yeah, so when you go to sleep, the brain is not just shutting down. It's actually doing something active and very important to the health of your brain and actually the rest of your body. So the stages of sleep that you typically will go through are, the first stage is called non-REM stage 1, which is, or drowsiness. So the EEG will go from this kind of these oscillations. If you look at the EEG, they're usually low voltage when you're awake and fast, and they kind of slow down. So fewer of them per second as you start to get drowsy. And then as you go into the second stage, non-REM stage 2 of sleep, there appear these very beautiful little events that we call spindles, which are thought to be very important in helping transfer memories that you formed during the day or things you learned from the short-term kind of like email box of your hippocampus, the structure in the brain that looks and then it transfers it to the longer-term storage up in the other parts of your brain. So that's going on. And then as you get into the deeper stage of sleep, we're just starting to understand better what that stage is for, but there's these very slow oscillations in the electrical activity of your brain. And that those slow waves are thought to be related to this process of cleaning your brain cleaning out the proteins, for example, that accumulate while you're awake. Actually, your brain shrinks a little bit when you're asleep, and this allows kind of this fluid to flush out some of the proteins, including ones that are responsible for, or at least contribute to the development of neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's disease. And then at at certain points while you're asleep, there's a switch, from this non-REM kind of sleep, the restorative sleep, to the REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And when you're in that state, in most people, thankfully you're actually paralyzed, and that's the stage when you have most sort of vivid dreams. And there's some, I think there's less, I'm not sure if Connie would agree, but I think that basically we understand what that stage is for a little less than the other stages, but it's thought to be, important for forming associations between, between memories, for example, and probably plays a role in kind of emotional and social health, perhaps because it helps us associate different ideas. So there's this very active kind of electronic symphony going on that plays essential roles in kind of learning and memory, preventing cognitive problems or neurodegenerative disease. And then that's just the brain part. There's also sleep is related to the health of the rest of the body, the immune system, and so on.
Great. Okay, thank you. So that's a great look at what's happening. So Connie, tell us then, what do we mean when we say getting good sleep? Is it getting every one of those stages? Is it something more than that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as far as like what's good sleep, I was on a panel a few years back that examined this question, really looking at what is good sleep objectively measured. So, Brandon was describing the various changes in sleep that are measured objectively, like during a sleep study and EEG. And yeah, I think there was agreement about what is not good sleep, or I think the term that was used was inappropriate, amount of various stages. So when there's too much or too little of a particular stage of sleep, like too much REM or too little REM, or too much stage 3 or too little, I think in general that was easier to identify. But the exact bounds of appropriate amount of these percentages, of REM or stage 3, I think that was more difficult. So there was a paper that came out of that panel, and in general, I think the charts show like what is the appropriate amount, and then there's what's inappropriate, and then there's this gray area that is sort of labeled as uncertain. So it's like, there maybe it's different for various individuals, or maybe we just need to know more about sleep in general to better define that.
Well, that's super interesting that it's not so clear cut, because it'd be easier certainly if it were. You could just tell everyone exactly, but since it's a hard thing to control too, probably for the best. So, but in speaking of it being tricky, what are some common sleep issues that can affect whether we're getting the appropriate amount, or even whether we're in this gray area? So why are they disruptive? How common are they? Connie, do you want to speak to that? Brandon, if you have anything to add also.
Yeah, I think there's probably, I would say, like the top 3 on my list would be, really the first one is insufficient sleep, which a lot of it is due to factors like, not providing enough time to get good sleep because of work or school or demands, that individual participating in other recreational activities. So a lot of it is just, not allowing enough time for sleep. And then there's some in the clinical arena, like chronic insomnia disorder and obstructive sleep apnea. And, I think like the insufficient sleep syndrome is really related to a societal underappreciation of the importance of sleep. So, as Brandon mentioned, there's so much that's going on when we're sleeping. It's not just this time when it's just, nothing's happening, but choosing sleep, I think, may be viewed in some contexts as a sign of weakness. And really, sleep deprivation can have a significant impact on a lot of important areas. Motor vehicle risk, is much higher for people who are sleepy because they haven't gotten enough sleep, as well as job and school performance. For the others that are more like in the clinical domain, for chronic insomnia disorder, it's and there is a definition that is generally accepted by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, and also in the DSM-5, and it's really chronic insomnia disorder is difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep or early awakenings 3 or more times per week with resulting impairment in daytime function, and that's been occurring for at least 3 or more months. And there's chronic insomnia disorder, which is probably affecting maybe fewer than 1 in 10, but insomnia symptoms, which may not necessarily meet these criteria, these strict clinical criteria, are really common. Maybe like a third of adults have these, and perhaps maybe statistics show that maybe like 1 in 10 may have symptoms of insomnia that are severe enough to cause daytime dysfunction. The third condition I mentioned was obstructive sleep apnea, which is characterized by repetitive obstructive events affecting the airway during sleep. And for older adults, this may occur in maybe as high as 1 in 5, depending on the definitions, the criteria that are used. And it can really have a significant impact on daytime function in terms of like people can get sleepy, very sleepy during the day because they're, really not getting good restful sleep at night during these obstructive events. And also it can affect just the general sleep of the individual, as well as their bed partners, who may be disturbed by snoring or sounds made when somebody has these obstructive events. So those would be my top 3. Maybe Brandon has some others.
No, that covers it.
Okay.
Top
Great.
3.
Those are the biggies. So, Brandon, I'm hoping we can pivot a little bit because I would really love to hear from you about your brain age index, which sounds to me like such an interesting way to think about our brain. So, would you explain what it is and why it's a useful tool?
Sure. Yeah. Let me tell you how we came up with it first. So this friend of mine, Matt Bianchi, and I, and a really fantastic postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Hao-Chi Swin, had just finished some work on automated sleep staging. We had really, we felt like we had kind of conquered that problem. We were able to show that we could do the recognition of stages of sleep as well as a kind of a person could do, but much faster and reproducibly. And we were thinking, what else would be interesting to do? And we thought, well, maybe you could predict how old somebody is from their brain waves overnight while they're sleeping. And that was just kind of for fun. And it turned out you could do that really well. And we got this graph that showed, actual age, chronologic age versus what we called brain age, which was essentially how old you looked. Right? So we took the way the model worked was we had a collection of 10,000 polysomnograms at the time from many of which were from people who turned out to be relatively healthy and have normal sleep. So we for every kind of age between 18 and 80, we were able to essentially extract what features are normal for each stage of sleep, and then using some artificial intelligence techniques, kind of given a new EEG, we can say you look mostly like a 50-year-old. Anyway, we had this graph that lined up really nicely with chronologic versus brain age. And so I went home and I told my wife Emily, guess what? We can predict how old you are from just one night of sleep. And she kind of rolled her eyes and said, well, if there's easier ways to find out how old people are. But so we started, thinking, I wonder if this is, actually useful for something. And it struck us that if you look older than you really are, maybe this is a sign of a problem, or the opposite, maybe that's a sign of good brain health. And so we started investigating this, and in every case we've looked at so far, it turns out to be correct. So if you take patients who have high blood pressure and say diabetes, and you kind of look at them and compare them with patients who don't have, who are otherwise similar in age and kind of and gender and other factors, on average, the patients who have these chronic diseases that affect the small blood vessels of the brain, and we know they can cause some cognitive impairment and decline, they have an older brain age than expected by several years. And then if we've looked at HIV, patients with chronic HIV who, although our therapies are pretty effective nowadays, still there's some gradual cognitive deterioration that occurs in many of these patients for reasons of chronic inflammation or maybe virus is still hiding out in certain reservoirs. And we see elevated brain age in those patients. And then as we looked at patients who have either worries, about their cognitive kind of health, but no diagnosis yet. Patients who have mild cognitive impairment, which is we think of as an early kind of stage of neurodegenerative disease, and then Alzheimer's disease. There's this gradient, where as you go across those categories, the brain age index goes up, and so it behaves kind of as an index of brain health, and so we're trying to understand better, how to use this actually to measure, maybe to be able to detect disease before it can otherwise be detected clinically. One nice thing about this is that it uses a non-invasive, very cheap kind of measurement, and there's increasingly kind of wearables that you can use to do this at home potentially. And so, yeah, this is the brain age index in a nutshell. I should also mention we're doing a trial. Actually, we're starting to think about, can you make your brain younger, right? So we have a trial right now where people are exercising for 12 weeks who initially were not exercising, and we're hoping to see, we'll find out maybe in the end of June, if you're able to, by doing this kind of moderate intensity exercise, make your brain behave like that of a younger person.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was definitely curious, can you make it younger? It sounds like a great article for prevention. But, I'm also, I think it's so interesting to really hear that proof that sleep and the brain are so connected. And, Connie, I'd love to turn to you, because you've done research, and you've worked so much with older adults, right? And so can you talk about how sleep changes as we age? And, to sort of Brandon's point about, making it young, can we try to counter them, do you think? Is that an issue that comes up in your work?
Yeah, so there are some changes that have been observed with age, and really, with age, sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented, and actually, a lot of these changes occur earlier in adulthood, into middle age, and plateau to some degree in older age. So a lot of the changes are occurring much earlier than older adults. And there are some changes as well with the biological clock. There have been some observations of shift to some degree in sleep timing to earlier hours. So people may feel sleepier a little bit earlier in the evening. And this has been observed with age. And there's also perhaps a smaller time window each day with older age when some of the sleep promoting signals are stronger in older adults. And so maybe perhaps this explains to some degree some of the disruptions in the early morning hours that some older individuals might experience. So if there's, they may be more vulnerable perhaps to some of the, whatever environmental disturbance, something like that. And especially this may be true if there's some reduction or decrease in the factors that signal the body to sleep. So these are some of the changes in sleep. Although, I really think that there's still a lot to be learned about, how much of this is just with aging and how much of this is some of the comorbidities that come and track with older age.
Mhm. Interesting. So, I think a lot of people are probably nodding and thinking, that sounds like me, the different kind of changes that you're talking about. And then I think a lot of us want to turn to trying to figure it all out. So, Brandon, could you speak to how helpful do you think it is for people to track their sleep? Can we all become sleep experts of ourselves?
I hope so. In the future, I think that's definitely possible. Like I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different wearable devices now available, and I guess I'll make a couple of comments. I mean, I think that so the amount of sort of research that's been done on these trackers, that most of them are not FDA approved. I'm not sure if any are actually. And so they're often sort of studied less. They're marketed and before they're kind of really well studied. So I think probably for healthy people with relatively normal sleep, they're probably reasonably accurate, and it's certainly useful for looking at trends. I think if you have as a way of detecting sleep problems and making a very accurate diagnosis, there's more work to do before you could just say, well, don't worry unless this thing sends you an alert that says there's something wrong. And then I guess they also, many of these devices are indirect, right? So they, for example, the watches, they don't measure your brain waves, right? They can measure your heart rate or your heart rate variability, things that measure just your movement. Well, that's a different signal, and those are related to sleep, but they're not exactly the same thing as as what your brain is doing. And for example, if you have, say, a lung disease, then things that are based on breathing would be kind of messed up. Or if you have an arrhythmia or heart failure, I wouldn't expect something based on heart rate variability to provide kind of the same information that we would get from, say, a typical sleep study that measures your brain activity. And then the brain age thing, really, we've tried actually, sort of, and it doesn't work if you can't measure brain waves. So I think we have a lot to learn about exactly who they work for, what kinds of questions they can actually tell you, what their statistical kind of properties are, for each disease that we might want to know about. How accurately can they warn you? How often are they, falsely positive or falsely negative, that kind of thing. But I mean, in general, I think it can be useful, just as long as you use them with an understanding that they are limited and there's more research needed.
Mm-hmm. Good to hear. Interesting to hear. Yeah. Connie, another thing that I think some people might, turn to or wonder about is sleeping pills. And I know that you do work on about sleeping pills, and also other sleep aids that maybe aren't prescription. But are these tools that can be helpful? And what do we know about using them properly? Since I know some of your work is about getting away from them.
Yeah, so in general, for individuals who have chronic insomnia disorder, the recommended first-line therapy is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia rather than sleeping pills. And I would say the case for this non-medication approach is particularly strong for older adults who may have comorbidities that might make them more vulnerable to the risks and side effects of sleeping pills and to other sleep aids. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, is it's not sleep hygiene alone, which I often hear healthcare providers or patients equate the two, thinking like, okay, if I just have healthy sleep habits, this is going to be the same as going to six sessions of CBTI, and it's really not the case. I would say sleep hygiene is more like brushing your teeth and flossing, and you should definitely engage in these healthy sleep promoting behaviors. However, if you had a cavity or a tooth abscess, brushing is not enough, and so you need more definitive treatment. And that definitive treatment, I think everyone deserves a try at cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia before turning to sleeping pills or sleep aids if one has chronic insomnia disorder. And some of the there are a variety of sleeping pills and sleep aids, and I think some are more well studied than others. Some of the most common prescription sleeping pills are benzodiazepines. It's a class of drug that works for sleep, and related or they're often called Z drugs. They're benzodiazepine receptor agonists. So they work on similar types of receptors in the brain. And the as far as whether they're helpful, some people may have some benefit, but then they also may carry a significant amount of risk of falls and hip fracture, and some of them have been, people will do things while they're sleeping, complex behaviors, we call them parasomnias, where they might start preparing meals, might go outside and start walking around, and those of course can be dangerous. So my general approach is that, try cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia first, and let's see how far we can get with that, because there's a lot of success with that. And for many people, they have the tools in their body. Like they have them. We just need to like put the behavior and the cognitions and all this together, and it can actually improve people's insomnia substantially.
Can I just add one comment about another interesting thing about sleeping? Some sleeping pills, they're not all the same thing. They have different mechanisms, but some of these, like the Z drugs, actually will change the nature of what's going on when your eyes are closed and you're laying still, right? We call it sleep still, but if you measure the kind of the microstructure of sleep, so as opposed to how long you spend in each stage, but just what the brain waves look like, they actually are altered by by certain drugs like the Z drugs, and so it's not not clear that you're getting the same benefit as you do from normal sleep. So I completely agree with Connie, and there have been a couple of studies where you just sort of do testing of how well people perform on cognitive tests in the morning after having sort of natural sleep versus sleep with one of these drugs, and from the outside they look the same, but people perform worse after these drugs. So there's certainly a role for them, but I agree you should try other things before.
Speaking of trying other things before, I thought it was such a good point Connie made, that CBTI does not equal sleep hygiene. But Brandon, is there anything you'd add about sleep hygiene itself that because you've studied a lot of people with, quote, normal?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. So if you're going to see, if sleep hygiene doesn't work for you, you need to see someone like Connie or a specialist. But I think my sense is that most people like me, my main improvement I've made that's helped with sleep is sleep hygiene. I think that if you just kind of do the most good for the most people, sleep hygiene is where to start. So things like, just very simple things like not drinking caffeine too late in the day, right? That's maybe it's common sense, but a lot of people do it, and then they wonder why they don't feel refreshed in the morning. Trying to maybe not have habits like watching television in bed, or things that kind of keep your mind in the awake mode. So I think sleep hygiene is actually pretty effective and for a lot of people, and maybe all they need to do. But if those things aren't working, then yeah, you need to try something else.
All right, good. Yeah, thanks for that addition there. In a few minutes, we're getting a lot of really interesting questions coming in, so I want to be sure we get to those, but let me ask you guys a couple more things before we do. One is, I'd love to know what you're excited about in the area of sleep research. What's happening, what's coming that we should know about? Connie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting areas is in circadian rhythm research, and really being able to measure individual patients' circadian rhythm. This is not necessarily an area it's not my focus of research, but I think we need a better understanding of how disruptions in circadian rhythm affect our risk for various diseases, and perhaps some of the interactions with medications. So this is an area that I think is really exciting, and I think looking into the future, perhaps we'll have some changes to our approach to diseases and medication dosing.
That's exciting. Great to hear. Brandon, what about you? What are you excited about?
Well, I'm excited about moving kind of sleep medicine, but into the home, and then making it sleep just accessible to even for people who don't have a diagnosable sleep problem, just as a routine tool for measuring and tracking brain health, making it easy. And then I'm also interested in seeing whether some of the kind of theories that we have about the role of sleep in long-term brain health are actually true, right? So the way to test those ideas that sleep is important for brain health are to intervene, improve sleep, and then see if we actually can maybe protect people from say neurodegenerative disease or cognitive decline in a way that we can actually measure.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Great. All right. Okay. Any additional final thoughts before the questions on what we can do tonight to get a good night's sleep? We talked a little bit about sleep hygiene, but what would you both recommend that we take away?
Connie, you go.
Okay. So I like to think about sleep each night as if you were dining at a fine restaurant nightly. And so during the day, you want to build up your collection of sleep coins so that you have enough to spend at night when you want to sleep. And you earn your sleep coins by being awake minute after minute, hour after hour. And if you have a lot of sleep coins, it's going to enable you to have the best sleep meal because you're going to have a really full piggy bank filled with sleep coins. And in addition, you want to try to keep a regular wake up time. So, if you have this nightly, fine dining experience, you want to show up at the restaurant nightly when it's open and leave when it's closed, right? So wake up at a regular time daily and try to be in bed only when your sleep restaurant is open for business. So those are my thoughts.
I love it. That is an amazing analogy. I totally wrap my mind around it. Brandon, what about you? What should we take away?
Yeah, I agree with what Connie said. I guess I would just add that there are lots of different pieces of advice that you can get, and many of them sound crazy and probably don't work for most people. But I think if you can be systematic about it, I guess is testing out what works for you. So, I mean, maybe this is where wearables will have a role in the future. If you can objectively measure your sleep, track how you feel, and then relate it to what you're doing, and kind of try one thing consistently, compare that to your baseline in an objective way, and if it worked, then keep doing it and enhance it. If it didn't, throw it away. I mean, I guess I think there's a lot of variability in sort of what works for different people. There are some general principles, and then there are these individual things. And so yeah, I think being objective and quantitative is a good way for individuals to improve their sleep.
Great. Thank you both. This is so fascinating. And I think our audience is super interested too, judging by all these questions that I'm seeing. So I'm going to start with a question. Someone's asking about a bad habit. Well, we'll find out if it's a bad habit. They say listening to via earbuds to NPR in the night and falling asleep. So falling asleep with the radio on. So so the question is this akin to the waking brain and therefore no benefit? They're not getting deep, restful sleep with the, voices coming into their heads.
Oh, listening to NPR while you're asleep?
So you're falling asleep, but it's still on.
Still on.
Yeah.
I don't think that. If you're falling asleep, it's probably okay. I'm not sure I have any real answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah, if it keeps you awake, then don't do it.
Yeah.
But I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think your brain is pretty good at shutting things off. For some people, white noise is good. Maybe NPR is like white noise to some people.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Connie, do you have an opinion on this? Doesn't seem bad to me.
Yeah, I think that if there's like a lot of fluctuation in the decibels, I guess, in sound, and I think sometimes this is different from TV, but some of the flickering light, I think can be somewhat disruptive. But but particularly, I guess if it turns off after a certain amount of time, a lot of times these they're on for a little while and then it can shut off, so it's not playing like all night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I recommend not listening to books on tape, because you miss part of the story.
Right, that practical aspect of it, right? And then becomes a part of your dream, maybe. I wonder if that happens with the NPR listener, the news is in their head. Connie, I wonder if you have an answer to this. Is there any relation between diet or dietary timing and sleep? Or Brandon too, but I would just, in context of your coins that we're, collecting for our sleep, does diet play in?
I think you don't want to be too full, but you don't want to be too hungry either. So sort of a happy medium. And yeah, I think I think caffeinated food products, and and if you have too much in terms of liquid at night, sometimes that can be disruptive because then there's a need to get up to use the restroom in the middle of the night. So if Brandon has other thoughts.
No, I agree with
Okay.
comments.
And oh, Brandon, this is for you. For people interested in your study, exploring if exercise can make the brain younger, can you explain the study in more detail, and can people participate in your research?
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's almost over this first phase, but there will be a second. So I'll tell you about the study and then what we might find. So the study was designed, so you have to be over 50 years old to participate. And you have to be what we're defining as sedentary, essentially meaning you don't do regular exercise at the beginning of the study. But of course, if you're signing up, it's because you want to turn over a new leaf. And so at the beginning of the study, we measure, we do some cognitive testing. We actually have you do an exercise test as well to measure your aerobic fitness, just sort of how well you, and then you do a sleep study, and then we send you home with some devices that measure your heart rate continuously, your activity levels. We have a sleep tracker, actually an EEG that you wear at home twice a week. So we measure you pretty intensively. And then you have a prescription to do at least 5 days of exercise per week, at least 30 minutes per day, to get your heart rate up to a certain target level. So this is designed so that if you do it, you should be in better aerobic shape by the end. And in previous studies, we know that this can sort of make your brain objectively healthier as measured by MRI. Some parts of your brain get thicker, and then people in some studies have done better on cognitive testing after this kind of exercise routine. But it's a pretty mild exercise routine. And so at the end, you do these more intensive measurements. Again, we repeat your aerobic fitness test, your cognitive testing, and this formal sleep study. And then what we hypothesize is going to be true is that to the extent that you increase your aerobic fitness, so that's on the x-axis, your change in this thing called VO2 max, to the extent that you improve that, we expect that your brain age will go down, right? That your brain will generate waves that look like those of a younger person. Again, we don't have the final results yet, but that's what we hope is true. My guess is I think I'm kind of 50 and 50 on whether it's going to turn out as we suspected. One thing that we think though from looking at some of the data is that maybe this exercise routine is not quite intense enough, and so we're planning a follow-up where we are a little more strict about how much exercise you get and have people push themselves a little bit more. It's a 3-month study, which is fairly short time to kind of change the health of your brain. But yeah, that's what the study is about, and we hope that we find a positive result. But even if the results are, they look promising basically on our initial peeks at the data. But I suspect that exercise is something where if you do more of it, you get more benefit. And so that may be the result is learn some lessons and do it in an even better way. There's other types of interventions that we may be able to study in the same way. I see some questions about meditation, and there's certainly some reasons to believe that kind of very intensive and serious types of meditation over sustained periods may have measurable effects on brain health. There's questions about diet, and so we can one of the messages I guess from the at least my work is that I think we have a way to measure this now, right? Not just how do you feel, but physiologically we have a thing we can measure to see if the interventions are working.
All right, thank you for addressing that. We've also had a number of questions about therapeutics like melatonin, CBD. Do either of you have an opinion to share on those?
Connie, my opinion is that I don't know if they work. They probably work for some people, and some don't need them. And this was my comment about there's all kinds of things that some people find helpful, but whether they work better than not using them for an individual, I think kind of varies from case to case, and you can sort of do your own experiments as long as they're safe things. But Connie, you may have some more experience treating people with these.
Yeah, I think with melatonin, it's I would say, if you are able to address some of um, the factors through melatonin is supplement, so it's still something that is medication-like. And if you're able to get benefit without the melatonin, then I think that's the optimal approach. But I think with melatonin, it's for some people, they do find some improvement in sleep with, as far as if they have difficulty initiating sleep, that it improves that aspect. Some of the large, the studies where they've looked at this with in comparison to other types of treatments, the amount of benefit is really kind of small. If you look across, some of these trials, perhaps there are some medications that interfere with melatonin. For example, there's common heart medication class beta blockers that can affect melatonin. So maybe there are subsets of patients who would benefit. But I think one concern though is that they're unregulated. So there was one study when they looked at melatonin supplements and examined like exactly what was in the bottle, and they found that some of the melatonin supplements didn't have any melatonin at all, even though it was labeled as melatonin, and some had much larger quantities than what was stated on the bottle. So I think one concern, of course, is like you're not always sure what you're getting when you take these supplements.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you. Before I move on to the next, a few people are wanting to know how can they get involved in a sleep study, either Brandon, yours, or are there any specific or general feedback you can give people who want to be a part of this research?
So if you want to be involved in this, so we are doing some other studies, so feel free to, I guess, email me, and then I'm happy to tell you what we're doing. But I think most, I imagine there's people who live all over the place out in the audience, and so most medical centers are doing research studies, and you can contact them to find out what's going on.
Okay, great. So contact your local medical.
Contact your local place. Yep.
Okay, great. Here's something we haven't talked about, which is naps. So someone wants to know, other than a nap, how can I have more energy in the afternoon? And are naps important? Are they wise? And thank you for asking this question, Asker, because I would really like to know.
My thought on naps is, if you take a nap and you sleep okay at nighttime and it gives you energy, then that's, then it's fine, continue with it. I think if individuals have trouble sleeping at nighttime and they're napping, then that may be the time when we want to examine, the length of the nap, the time of the nap. So I think it sort of depends on whether, an individual has trouble sleeping at nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about feeling fatigued then during the day? Is there something else? Maybe this is outside of what you both do, but is there something else that people should know if they nap but then they don't sleep well at night? Is there a missing piece there that you can help us fill in?
I think there could be a lot of reasons for feeling fatigued. So that's a pretty kind of non-specific complaint. I mean, I think I'd echo some of the earlier comments about there are some pretty common, those top three that Connie mentioned are very common, right? So if you're not kind of giving yourself an adequate opportunity to sleep every night, that's the thing you can change. If you if you snore, or if your bed partner notices that you stop breathing, at night every once in a while, or if you have kind of sleep apnea is very common, and an addressable reason for feeling tired in the daytime. but if there are other reasons for feeling fatigued as well that sort of just you know exercising regularly can address that. But if you can take a nap, that's great. There are some some places where so when I lived in Taiwan at one point, and it was routine for people to take a nap in the afternoon, and it's if you can do that, I don't think there's anything wrong as long as you can sleep at night again. It's a good way to recharge. I don't know, Connie, what would your advice be about if somebody feels fatigued? What should they think of?
Yeah, it's fatigue is a symptom that could be the result of a lot of different factors, which may be a health condition or maybe not be a health condition. So I think, yeah, fatigue is it's pretty, there's a lot of things that can contribute. Now, from a sleep perspective, I think the ones that you mentioned, certainly examining how much sleep you're getting at night. And one other is that, if there's this phenomenon that's sometimes termed like social jet lag, where people have a schedule, perhaps Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends it's a different schedule. And, I think that's another common type of sleep condition that can result in people feeling not very well rested the next day. And a fix there is to try to really maintain more of a regular schedule, even on weekends. Although it can be challenging because of various responsibilities.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. Thank you. I'm seeing some things. Some people who are having trouble staying asleep as long as they want in the morning, they wake up early. And then I also know there are people who say, oh, I don't, there are people who say they don't need very much sleep, and people who need less sleep, they feel they need less as they get older. I mean, that's a lot of things to parse, but can we talk about that, like sleeping less than maybe you should or want to?
I really think, individual sleep needs vary. And so um, I think a common myth is that people need, say, like 8 hours of sleep. We do talk about, the need to, society allow people to sleep as long as they need to, and so we don't want to have people sleeping too short of amount of time, but everyone has their own individual sleep needs. And so I think the gauge there is like, what does it take for you to feel good during the day? That's probably the amount of sleep that you need at nighttime.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I would. It is can be complicated. I think sometimes people don't realize that they are getting there. Sometimes people turn out to be getting more sleep than they think they are. There's it's possible to have misperceptions about how long you're actually asleep, and sometimes I guess just knowing that getting formally measured and knowing that you're sleeping enough it can be helpful. But I think in addition to just gauging based on how well you feel, I think in the future it may be possible and may be helpful for some people to be able to do some kind of app test of what your reaction time is, for example. Maybe objectify the am I doing as well as I can. I think that the move to quantify ourselves is maybe going to be helpful for figuring out what your optimal amount is. But I agree. Right now, the best gauge is just how well do you feel?
What if you're sleeping long enough, someone asks, but not feeling like not long enough, like sleeping 8 hours,
Yeah.
but not feeling rested in the morning? Does that have to do with the amount, or does it have to do with something else, another factor?
Right. So that may be, so again, not everybody needs 8 hours. Some people need longer. So that could be the issue. But there is, and I think we don't really fully understand, what good sleep quality means, right? I think Connie kind of alluded to this. There's some open questions. So even if you're sleeping long enough, that not all sleep is the same, right? And so there's this idea about, one of the open questions about sleep is how do you really measure it. We have these 5 stages that I've talked about earlier, but really that's pretty coarse. Right? And so within one of those stages, some people are lighter or easier to wake up and maybe getting less restoration or less of what sleep is supposed to do for you than others. So I think we do have more things to learn about really what appropriate sleep quality is and how to improve it. That's part of why it's exciting, to be involved in sleep research right now. I think with we're going to learn a lot more about that.
Great. We've actually gotten 3 or 4 questions about alcohol, about it making you drowsy. So is that good? Or should you stop at a certain time before you sleep? So I'm interested.
Yeah.
So many of us are interested.
Yeah, I think with alcohol, during the first half of the night, you may be sleeping more, but then as it's being metabolized and exiting the body, then sleep tends to be disrupted. So in general, if you're having trouble with sleep, insomnia or something like that, then that's something where we would not encourage, using alcohol to promote sleep or something like that, because it does disrupt sleep objectively, as in the second half of the night.
Interesting, right? So you don't, maybe not even aware that it's happening because you've fallen asleep, but yeah. I think we're getting pretty close to the end of our time here. Let me just see if there's anything we think we can, let me just ask this about identifying whether you have an issue that maybe needs addressing beyond sleep hygiene. What do you consider a sleep problem? How should someone denote that for themselves?
Yeah, and I think if you feel like you're not functioning well because you're feeling tired all the time, that's a good reason to talk to your doctor. Again, some of these sleep problems that Connie mentioned are very common and easily treated, or that there are treatments that work. So I think if you have a question, talk to your primary care doctor. And it's you shouldn't have a high bar to do that.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Well, Connie, anything to add there?
No, I would totally agree. I think any sort of effect on daytime function, I think talk to your primary care doctor about any sort of sleep issues.
Great, thinking about your day and how you're functioning. Great. Well, I think we've all learned a lot today about. I love the mix here that you've brought us of understanding our brains and what's happening, and then giving us some great advice for our own sleep. So thank you to both of you. And thank you, audience, for your attention and wonderful questions. So please join us, everyone, in July for our next Live Better Longer talk about the Dog Aging Project. It's going to be super interesting what we can learn from our best friends about our own longevity. And follow AFAR and Prevention to get updates on our series, find out how to sign up and everything. So again, thank you to Connie and Brandon for your insight and wisdom, and thank you to all of you, and I hope that everyone here has a good night's sleep.